Okay, we're on the record.
Things happen.
Good? Oh, still morning. Good morning, everybody. I'll call the first meeting of 2018 of the New York State Fire Prevention and Building Code Council to order. We have a relatively short agenda today. Thank God it's spring. First agenda item, welcome. So, good morning to everybody. I have a number of announcements. Some of them not so happy, so I'll just try and get through those. First thing is second. I'll get to it. We always call a roll after. All right. Okay. All right. Joe wants me to call a roll. Let's call a roll. Make sure we have.
Okay. Let's see. Ms. Kegel, designee for Secretary Rosado.
I'm here.
Paul Martin, designee for Fair Administrator Francis Neary.
Present.
Michael Weber, designee for Commissioner Ruth Ann Wisnauskas.
Present.
Vincent Rappaciullo, designee for Acting Commissioner Robert Mearden. Keith Wen, designee
Here.
for Honorable Bill de Blasio. Sean Hamlin.
Here.
Michael Sabatino.
Here.
Tim DeRuscher is late. William Tyne.
Here.
Dominic Mirinelli.
Here.
We have 9 as quorum.
Okay, back to announcements. First, it's sad duty that I have to, for the second time in a year, announce the passing of a member of this council. Mayor Judy Kennedy passed away last month after a fight with cancer. The state and this council lost a valuable person who very much helped us see things and understand things. As you can tell, I'm pretty upset about this. I think it would be best if we all just took a moment of silence right now, just to remember our colleague. Thank you. On behalf of the council, the secretary, my sincerest and deepest condolences to her family. Moving on, that means that, for my second announcement, that means that her designee, Tom Casey, can no longer serve on the council. So I want to thank Tom. He stood in for her ably, especially a lot over the last couple of years. Tom was a force of nature, actually. He was a real strong advocate on behalf of the fire service, and I was very happy to have him here. So Tom will be missed. And one more. I also received word last month that Barbara Rice, our county representative, has resigned from the Code Council. She's moving on to a new opportunity. So hopefully we will still be seeing her around Albany very soon, but for today we'll just say that she has moved on. That takes this council to 11 members for the time being. We are actively vetting candidates right now to get us back up. That's why we're so close today. When Tim gets here, we'll have 10 at least, but we're on +1. But for now, we're pretty low. So I thank all the members for coming today and being here to get us through our first meeting of the year. Another announcement. You'll notice a change to my left. Joe has asked Penny O to get some experience, so this is Penny O High. She is going to be our counsel here going forward, actually. And finally, I'm going to turn to John and let him introduce his new staff.
Yep. We have a new staff member for the Code Development Unit, Jeffrey Hinderleiter. Engineer, actually, so far he's proven to be a great asset to the Code Development Unit. I'm sure you'll be hearing more from him.
Great. Thank you, John. Welcome. Okay, let's move on to the second item on the agenda, the minutes of December 5th, 2017. Everyone should have received this in their packet last week. Is there any discussion, any changes, etc.? Okay, hearing none. Adopt the minutes of December 5th, 2017. Do I have a second? Second, Paul Martin. All in favor of adopting the minutes of December 5th, 2017, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none. The minutes of December 5th, 2017 are adopted unanimously. All right, we have two more restrictive local standards in front of us today. They are not new. I believe this council has seen them in some form or another. We've discussed them a couple of times now. I think we're pretty ready for action, so I'm going to start with more restrictive local standard for the town of Huron, local law number 2 of 2015, which has to do with flood provisions. I'm going to ask Bernard to give us just a quick overview because, like I said, we've seen this before. We have a representative from the town. She's out in Buffalo, Amy Kendall, so she's going to speak if she would like to. And then we'll have questions, comments, etc. And we'll see if we can get to a motion and move forward. So, Gerard.
Okay. This petition, Town of Huron had sent in a petition for approval of local standards for construction, their flood provisions, and at the December meeting, the Code Council decided to postpone action on the petition as discussed with Amy Kendall, Town Attorney for Town of Huron. Amy's attending in Buffalo. Petition was on the agenda for the March 7th meeting, which was canceled due to the snowstorm. This local law imposes standards for construction in flood hazard areas and was based on a model local law provided by New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Some of the standards imposed by the local law are more restrictive than the current version of the Uniform Code. However, because the local law was drafted when the 2010 Uniform Code was still in effect, and because the 2016 Uniform Code had increased provisions for flood protection, some of the standards for construction imposed by the local law are less restrictive than the corresponding provisions of the 2016 Uniform Code. The town has cited special conditions which appear to be valid and which appear to make the more restrictive standards for construction imposed by the local law necessary for the town. The more restrictive standards for construction imposed by the local law appear to conform with accepted engineering and flood prevention practices with the purposes of Article 18 of the Executive Law. However, less restrictive provisions of the local law appear not to conform with the currently accepted engineering and fire prevention practices. And what we have is we've broken this down in the analysis and identified recommendations. And the first recommendations, recommendation 1 is that the provisions in the local law that are more restrictive than standards imposed by 2016 Uniform Code be approved by the Code Council. There are 3 major provisions: coastal high hazard areas, identifying. Let's see. I'm going to just give a quick reminder. I'm only going to discuss the more restrictive standards. There are only 3. And then there are some that are the same and some that are less restrictive, which I'll identify in groups. Now, more restrictive standards these are all under construction standards. 5.1 general standards, 5.1-1 coastal high hazard areas. The following requirements shall apply within zones V1 through V30, VE, and V, or an area of moderate wave action. And item 2 actually is the more restrictive, and that's the use of fill for structural supported buildings, manufactured homes, or recreational vehicles on site 180 days or longer is prohibited. And the next one is in 5.4-3, and it's in regard to foundation standards, identifying that spread footings and fill material shall not be used for structural support of new building or substantially improved buildings of an existing structure. And the last more restrictive is section 5.8, critical facilities. In order to prevent potential flood damage to certain facilities that would result in serious danger to life and health, or widespread social or economic dislocation, No new critical facility shall be located within any area of special flood hazard or within any 500-year flood zone as shown on as a B zone or shaded X zone on the community's flood insurance map. So those are the standards that we're recommending for approval because they're more restrictive. There's the next group that are recommendation number 2 provides provisions of the local law that are more restrictive than uniform code only because of the local law's definitions of substantial improvement, cumulative substantial improvement, and substantial damage. So those provisions may be considered more restrictive because of the nature of the definitions, which in the manner in which the local law defines the terms, it will cause those standards to be imposed and become applicable in situations which the standards imposed by the 2016 Uniform Code would not be. So they're the same as ours, but because of these definitions, especially cumulative improvement, substantial improvement, they will kick in a little sooner than our code would have kicked them in. So we're recommending that those also be approved. And then recommendation number 3, we have provisions that are less restrictive, and staff recommends that the Code Council find that the standards for construction imposed by the ones that are less restrictive do not conform with currently accepted engineering standards. Recommendation 4 identifies other provisions, and these are provisions that don't impose standards for construction, so accordingly, the provisions that need not be reviewed by the Code Council. And finally, there's a recommendation, and it's a condition, and the staff recommends that the approval, adoption of the standards imposed by the local law provisions in the earlier recommendations 1 and 2 above be subject to the condition that no variance granted subject to section 6 of the local law shall reduce the applicable requirement below that which is required by the Uniform Code or by any subsequent version of the Uniform Code as is effective at the time the variance is granted. So they can give a local variance to their more restrictive standards, but it makes them refrain from varying to below the Uniform Code, which is typical for any more restrictive local standard. That's it for the summary.
Thank you, Gerard.
You're welcome.
Ms. Kendall, would you like to speak?
Yes, just briefly. My name is Amy Kendall. I'm an attorney with Knopf Shaw in Rochester, New York. We are attorneys for the town of Huron. I just wanted to provide some brief context on this law. The summary provided a lot of the information, so I will not be repetitive. The town is located on Lake Ontario. If you're not familiar, it's in Wayne County. It's primarily an agricultural community. The town has a significant amount of waterfront, not only Lake Ontario, it has 2 bays, 2 islands, and a strip of land known as the Sandbar, which has residential structures on it. It separates Lake Ontario from Sodus Bay. So the town has a great deal of concern and issues associated with flooding. It has accepted delegation of authority to enforce the Coastal Erosion Hazard Area Law and has recently adopted a local waterfront revitalization plan. So I just wanted to provide that information to give you some context about how important water is to the town. You know, as you probably are aware, this past year with the flooding on Lake Ontario, it's become more clear than ever that standards, really detailed standards, are required in the context of building regulation. Mr. Hathaway did indicate that the law was enacted in 2015. It was actually first enacted in 2014, so we're a long time getting here, and as he mentioned, it was based on a model law prior to the revision of the Uniform Code. And, since then, the Uniform Code has been revised and now addresses many of the town's concerns. And I just want to be clear that to the extent that the Department of State has determined that the law contains less restrictive standards, the town is prepared and has begun the process of amending its law. It has no interest in less restrictive standards. The town requests that the council approve the more restrictive standards as identified with department staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kevin. Does any member of the council have any questions, comments, et cetera, for Gerard or Ms. Kendall? Sure.
So in response to the flooding that's taking place along and across the Lake Ontario area, the state's been making a number of investments in that area. So is there anything about this that would, some ask this without knowing if there are requirements, but if there, is there anything that would conflict with any other requirements the state is placing on municipalities receiving that assistance?
I don't know of any. Amy, did you hear the question?
I think I understand the question. I will say that we did just adopt a local waterfront revitalization plan, which has been approved by the Department of State. That plan does contemplate a number of provisions related to flooding, related to docks and mooring. Compliance with the LWRP also means that the different agencies of the state have to comply with the LWRP as well. I'm not aware of any requirements in the flood law that would impact the numerous grants that waterfront communities are getting. I know that this law, as with most of the other laws in the town, do have to be reviewed for compliance with the LWRP as well as the coastal erosion hazard area law.
Thank you. Yeah, because there's so many different moving pieces in response to that.
Yeah.
Wondering if consistency.
Yeah, I think the LWRP would have reviewed process. So
Would be the mechanism, but sure.
Yeah, I believe that would take care of it. Are there any other questions, comments? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to ask council to read a potential motion. I mean, there is only 9 of us, so all 9 of us would have to agree in order to move something forward with that. So it's 4 pages, so everyone get ready.
On or about May 16th, 2016, the town board of the town of Huron, the town, enacted local law number 2 of 2016, the local law, which imposes certain standards for construction in flood zones in the town. On or about June 15th, 2016, the supervisor of the town submitted a copy of the local law and a petition relating to the local law, the petition, to the Code Council pursuant to Executive Law Section 379. I move, 1, that the Code Council determine pursuant to the Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 1, that the standards for construction imposed by the following provisions of the local law are more stringent and more restrictive than the standard imposed by the Uniform Code. Section 5.1-1, coastal high hazard areas, paragraphs 2 and 3. Section 5.4-3, foundation standards, paragraph 2. And Section 5.8, critical facilities. 2, that the Code Council determine pursuant to Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 1, that the standards for construction imposed by the following provisions of the local law are the same as the standards imposed by the Uniform Code, but may be considered to be more stringent and more restrictive than the standards imposed by the Uniform Code because, A, the standards imposed by the following provisions of the local law become applicable in the event of substantial improvement, including cumulative substantial improvement, and substantial damage, as those terms are defined in the local law. And B, the manner in which the local law defines the terms cumulative substantial improvement and substantial damage will cause the standards imposed by the following provisions to become applicable in situations in which the standards imposed by the Uniform Code would not become applicable. Section 5.1-1, coastal high hazard areas, paragraph 1. Section 5.1-3, encroachments, paragraphs 1 and 2. Section 5.2-3, utilities, paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. Section 5.3-1, elevation, paragraphs 2 and 4. Section 5.4.2, determination of loading forces. Section 5.4-3, foundation standards, paragraph 1. Section 5.5, non-residential structures except coastal high hazard areas, paragraphs 3, 4, and 5. And section 5.7, manufactured homes and recreation vehicles, paragraph 3. 3, that the Code Council find that the standards for construction imposed by the provisions of the local law mentioned in parts 1 and 2 of this motion are reasonably necessary in the town because of special conditions prevailing within the town, conform with the accepted engineering and fire prevention practices, and conform with the purposes of Article 18 of the Executive Law. 4, that based on the foregoing determination and findings, the Code Council adopt and approve the standards for construction imposed by the provisions of the local law mentioned in parts 1 and 2 of this motion, subject to the following condition: no appeal filed under section 6.0 of the local law, and no variance granted under section 6.0 of the local law shall reduce the applicable requirement below that which is required by the version of the Uniform Code in effect at the time such appeal is filed or such variance is granted. 5, that the Code Council determined pursuant to Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 1, that the standards for construction imposed by the following provisions of the local law are less stringent and less restrictive than the standards imposed by the Uniform Code. Section 5.2-1, anchoring. Section 5.2-2, construction materials and methods. Section 5.2-3, utilities, paragraph 1. Section 5.3-1, elevation, paragraphs 1 and 3. Section 5.4-1, elevation. Section 5.4-4, pile foundation system, or pile foundation design. Section 5.4-5, column foundation design. Section 5.4-6, connectors and fasteners. Section 5.4-7, beam to pile connections. Section 5.4-8, floor and deck connections. Section 5.4-9, exterior wall connections. Section 5.4-10, ceiling joist / rafter connections. Section 5.4-11, projecting members. Section 5.4-12, roof sheathing. Section 5.4-13, protection of openings. Section 5.4-14, breakaway wall design standards. Section 5.5, non-residential structures except coastal high hazard areas, paragraphs 1 and 2. Section 5.6, non-residential structures, coastal high hazard areas. And Section 5.7, manufactured homes and recreational vehicles, paragraphs 2 and 4. 6, that the Code Council find that the standards for construction imposed by the provisions of the local law mentioned in Part 5 of this motion do not conform with currently accepted engineering and fire prevention practices. And 7, that based on the foregoing determination and finding, the Code Council deny the town's request to adopt and approve the standards for construction imposed by the provisions of the local law mentioned in Part 5 of this motion. And I offer that to anyone who chooses to make such a motion.
You got it well read. Would any member like to make that motion?
So moved.
Is that you, Bill?
Yes.
Bill Time makes the motion. Paul seconds it. Do we have any discussion on the motion? It was a long one. Paul? Bill, do you have any questions?
No.
Paul?
Yeah, I would just like to say this, obviously, since I seconded it, I intend to vote in favor of the motion as presented. But I want to say this, in the aspect that Executive Law 379, the special conditions and area of the law allows the council to consider more restrictive local standards, gets thrown out and put before us quite frequently as a council saying, hey, these are special conditions in our town. And it's always well intended, it's always well meaning. But to me, that's a very high bar, an exceedingly high bar that a local government has to clear in order to sell me that they've got special conditions. Because I go to a section in the law a little earlier than 379 when I look at things in my duties here on the council, and that is in 371E, where the legislature says, the multiplicity of fire protection and building construction code requirement poses an additional problem for the people of the state, since it increases the cost of doing business in the state by perpetuating multiple requirements, jurisdictional overlap, and business uncertainties, and in some instances, by artificially inducing high construction costs. So I take that very seriously before I ever will open my mind to somebody getting an exception under 379 restrictive. In this case, my kudos go to the town of Huron for preparing this proposal, albeit it had a couple hiccups in it that where they slipped into more less restrictive standards, because they've sold me that in this case they do have a legitimate need for more restrictive standards, and hence that's why they're going to get my vote on this proposal.
Thank you, Paul. I would actually like to echo what Paul says. For me, I agree with Paul. It is a very high bar for a local community to have special conditions. And again, I agree with Paul that in this case, the town of Huron has put forth a situation where special conditions exist and they do meet the more restrictive standards noted in this motion. I will note that Tim DeRoysher has arrived. He has made it through the accident on the thruway. Multiples of accidents on the thruway. And he's here safe and sound, so that's excellent. Just in time, we are, Tim, in the middle of agenda item number 3. No, really? Are there any other questions, comments, et cetera, with regard to the motion?
It's Keith.
Hi, Keith. Go ahead.
Hi. So I just want to make sure, because a portion of the motion is to deny the structural provisions, the modifications. So if we go forward with this, I just want to make sure that whoever is subject to the new definition of substantial improvement, cumulative substantial improvement, and substantial damage, when they are working on the building, they're supposed to comply with the state code by default, right? In reference to those sections, 5.2-1 all the way through 5.7.
Joe, you're the counsel on this.
So that wasn't, the sections you just described through 5.7, those were the less stringent and less restrictive standards. And that was the second part of Gerard's analysis that he explained, where there were certain items that were less stringent. The cumulative substantial damage or cumulative substantial improvement language, that is certain circumstances where it could become more restrictive. And in those circumstances, we said that it would be permitted.
I got that part. So I think what's happening here is that we are agreeing with the township that they can set the threshold higher because of the special condition. I guess what I'm trying to get at is in reference to recommendation 3 about the actual structural provisions. We are, the motion is to deny the township from modifying the structural provisions because they're less stringent. Now, what is the fallback? Are we saying that whoever is subject to the flood zone requirements now, that they, in terms of structural provisions, they have to comply with the state code? Is that the effect?
For the ones that we are saying are less stringent and less restrictive, that means
Correct.
they have to follow the uniform code.
Okay. That's all it is. I just want to confirm. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Nguyen. Are there any other questions, comments, et cetera? All right. Hearing none, we'll take a vote on that motion. Gerard, if you'll call the roll, please.
Okay. Matt Tebow,
I'll vote aye.
Paul Marks,
Yes.
Michael Weber,
Yes.
Vincent Rappuccillo,
Yes.
Keith Wen,
Yes.
Michael Sabatino,
Yes.
Sean Hamlin,
Yes.
Tim DeRocher,
Yes.
William Tyne,
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
10 in favor, unanimous.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you to the town of Huron. Thank you to the members.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 4. Get my paper. More restrictive construction standards for the town of Ogden. Local law number 6 of 2017, fire separation between residential dwelling and garage. This is another one that we've seen before. See if we come to a conclusion today. We're going to have Nick give a quick presentation. There isn't anybody here from Huron today. So, Ogden, and then so once Nick finishes, we'll move on to questions, comments, and then we'll figure out a motion.
Morning. The town of Ogden passed Local Law 6 of 2017 to reinstate certain fire resistance rating requirements that existed in the 2010 Residential Code of New York State. The more restrictive standards pertain to the fire resistance rating of openings, the vertical and horizontal separation requirements between the attached garage and the dwelling. At the December 5th, 2017 Co-Council meeting, the Council discussed the separation requirements and how they compared to the current code. The division was directed to report back to the Council with data that would help the Council decide on not only this petition, but also on whether the separation requirements that existed in the 2010 Residential Code of New York State are still necessary in New York. The data requested by the Council included incident data, damages, injuries, cost differences, what other states have done regarding garage separation, and response times. In response to the Council's request, the division prepared a report, which is dated March 2nd, 2018, and included in your agenda packets. The report concluded that, on a national basis, garage fires represent about 3% of all home fires and occur about as frequently as fires that originate in attics, laundry rooms, and along exterior wall surfaces. However, garage fires in New York State appear to be even less frequent, representing approximately 1% of all home fires, about 3 times less than the national average. In addition to being infrequent, garage fire-related deaths and injuries represent only about 4% of the total. So as far as home structure fires are concerned, your garage is probably one of the safer areas of your home. Despite being relatively infrequent, garage fires contribute to about 10% of direct property damage. According to the U.S. Fire Administration, approximately 90% of all fires within the nation are responded to within 11 minutes. As far as protection is concerned, Uniform Code's requirement is equivalent to about 65% of the nation. And finally, the garage separation requirements under the 2010 Residential Code of New York State are generally more expensive than those under the 2015 IRC. Are there any questions up to this point on the data that was requested by the Council before I move on to the actual Ogden petition?
I'll take a chair's privilege here. Nick, how many fires have they had, say, in the last 5 to 8 years in that town?
In Ogden specifically?
Yep. That originate, actually, moving even more specific, that originate in the garage?
Yeah. So let's see, we did provide that data. It is in Appendix C of the revised staff analysis. Ogden is served by 3 fire districts. Spencer Fort Fire District saw 4 fires between 2011 and 2017 that originated in the garage. The Chile Fire Department, again, had 4 between 11 and 17 that originated in the garage, and the Churchville had none. And they had 93 total fires in Ogden since 2011.
So it's statistically small. Thank you.
So to specifically address the Ogden petition, the staff analysis, which is also in your agenda packets, was revised based on new information provided by the town and OFPC's fire incident reporting system. The OFPC data is the stuff we just discussed as Appendix C report. According to OFPC's data, if you look at percentages, it's still pretty small, about 7%. It's higher than the state, but the problem is it's statistics. So we don't really know if this higher percentage is due to random data sampling, in other words, chance, or if there's a meaningful difference in the town of Ogden that places them at a higher risk. As discussed at the last code council meeting, the standards for construction that are under consideration by the council are more restrictive than the standards in the Uniform Code. A determination needs to be made as to whether or not they are reasonably necessary because of special conditions prevailing within the town. Are there any questions on the revised staff analysis?
I'll let the council go. Does any council members have any questions or comments for Nick?
I do have one question. In the cost analysis, for the top line, you had indicated 3/4 hour fire resistance rating as the previous 2010 code and decades prior to that as being 1/2-inch chipboard. And I think that might have been a typo, that it's probably fire rated type X or type C or something of that nature. So I don't know if that really changed anything from a cost per square foot provision.
I think that line item is copied directly from kind of residential code, the 1/2-inch gypsum board ply from either side. I think that might have been, I'd have to look, but I think that might have been accepted. I'm pretty sure that came straight from the 2010 residential. But anyway, in any case, no, I believe it did not affect the cost.
Okay.
Again, the cost increase is very small. If you look at got some numbers here, I think I ran like a 28-foot wide by 8-foot high garage. The difference in cost is somewhere between $552 to $588 for the sheetrock and the door. So it's not a lot, but it is not a cost.
Thank you.
Nick, response times for the town of Ogden, are they within the national average?
Yes, I believe they stated that at the last meeting. They're with national averages.
So they're around 11 minutes?
Yes. Give me 1 second, I'll probably find it. I do believe that information is in the report, but yes, they're on the national average. Ten to 12 minutes.
12 minutes. And the current standard under the code is for these pieces of gypsum, that's right?
Yes.
I mean, I'll just speak for a second. I'm going obviously in a direction here because I agree with what Paul said earlier, and I'll bring it up again. You know, special conditions is a very high bar. You know, we have a uniform code. That is what the legislature asked us to have in the state. And you know, they want to keep it as uniform as possible across the state. So for us to alter that, there has to be a strong proffer that there's a reason to alter it. And I don't think I'm seeing it here. I just, given the national average, given that they're within the response times of national average, being that the statistics that do show that they do have a bit of a higher percentage of fires that start in the garage than the state or the national average. The problem is the number of fires are so low that it's almost statistically insignificant. So I think that's where my thinking is heading. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Tim? I said something that queried you?
Yeah, just as a matter of question, I certainly agree that following the national standards is a nice, easy path for everybody to go through, and I think that's a good thing to do. But I think one of the items that's missing here, maybe the town hasn't gone through and described the special circumstance that they have in that area. Certainly, that's the beginning of the whole question, I think, from here. But I think there was a mention in the last code council meeting about the future 2018 codes, and I think one of the items that was put on for discussion was the garage dwelling unit separations in 1 and 2 family and townhouses, I think was included. But just for a matter of information, currently the way that the IRC reads is essentially 1 layer of 1/2-inch gypboard between the garage and the dwelling unit, between the garage and the attic, which when you look at standard gypsum board, it really only provides us with, in laboratory best case conditions, about 15 minutes, which is actually in the building code. So a half-inch regular gyp board provides us with 15 minutes. If you look at standard response times, and everybody's talking about everybody wants to be standard, doesn't mean everybody is, and it doesn't mean that that happens all the time. And taking in the report, which I, by the way, was very good, it gives us information on response times in different regions and different populations, and the more rural you get, obviously it becomes a longer period of time for the fire department to get there. But one of the things that's in that report is that it also states very clearly that it doesn't tell us anything about fire growth, fire development before someone calls the fire department. So there's a significant, could be a significant period of time in that region. If you add that with the time that it takes the fire department to get there, and then the time, just as the report had indicated, the time it takes for them to set up, 15 minutes clearly is not enough. Even if you said on a good day it's going to be 5 minutes for someone to discover a garage fire, most of the time, I think my personal experience has been it's coming out the building windows for someone to discover it. So a half-inch standard layer of chipboard, 15 minutes as the code is right now, versus a half-inch layer of Type X or Type C fire code, same dimensions, provides us supposedly with 25 minutes of finished rating. So I think there's an opportunity to add something. Looking at the loss statistics also, it's clear in my mind in the construction that we have in homes today, when it does penetrate it, the losses are quite large. And that is primarily because of the type of construction that we're using today. So I would want to have this item still retained for further discussion in the 2018 code amendment provisions that we're looking at right here. It's just part of our agenda later on. And just leave it at that from an informational standpoint. My own personal belief is half-inch chipboard is certainly not adequate for that separation if we don't have any detection or notification from what goes on in a garage, which is, there is nothing that's currently required there. So I think there's an opportunity to look at that, and to do that, as Nick so rightfully stated, it's a relatively minor, almost a no cost to make some of those changes. I'll leave it at that, and we'll move on with this item.
Just a quick clarification. Actually, ICC fairly recently, I don't know if it was in the last code, did improve the garage ceiling to habitable space up to 5/8 inch Type X, which is the same as we have in our code. And looking at the half-inch gypsum board, they say on the garage side, they don't make it perfectly clear, but the assumption is there's something else on the habitable space side. So this just makes sure that there's a half on the garage side.
And I think that the membrane protection on the garage side is the most important piece. Once it penetrates that membrane barrier and it gets into either the attic space and or a wall cavity or something from that, it's pretty much a chase it around the building from that point.
Paul? Just a quick question, Nick, for the rest of my colleagues on the council. Can you tell us what we anticipate seeing in the 2018 version in this, in regards to this issue?
I don't believe it's changed.
Okay, that's what I want. Okay.
So we would be talking about New York change.
Well, what I want to make sure is that if this was to go forward, that we didn't go up and then have to come back down and deal with it in 18, or if we choose not to move forward with this, it's consistent into 18, so that we don't go flat and have to, then just say, as we change, take 2018, go, we got it wrong 3 months.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Bill
Bill?
Time. The only comment I have is that I haven't seen anything in this petition that indicates that Ogden is any different than any other rural community in upstate New York.
Other than they get a lot more snow and everybody wants to have their vehicles in garages. Being from that county.
You just wanted to say you get a lot of snow. Anyone else? Okay, we have two motions prepared. This is one way or the other, so I think the best way to handle this is to have somebody make a motion to either grant or deny, and then we'll read the right one into the record based on that motion. And then we'll take it up. So, does anyone want to make a motion right now? John?
Motion to deny.
Motion to deny, okay. Do I have a second for a motion to deny?
Second.
Seconded by Bill Time. Okay, Mr. Paniota, can you read what the motion would sound like to deny?
Sure. On or about September 13th, 2017, the town of Ogden, the town, enacted local law number 6 of 2017, a local law, which amended chapter 210 of the code of the town of Ogden, the town code, by adding a new section 210-52.2 of the town code. The local law was filed with the Department of State's State Records Unit pursuant to the municipal local law on October 10th, 2017. On or about October 11th, 2017, the town supervisor submitted a copy of the local law and petition relating to the local law to the Code Council pursuant to Executive Law Section 379. On December 5th, 2017, the Code Council found and determined, pursuant to Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 1, that the standards imposed by Section 210-52.2E of the Town Code, as added by the local law, were less stringent and less restrictive than the standards imposed by the Uniform Code, and denied the town's request that the Code Council adopt or approve the standards imposed by Section 210-52.2 of the Town Code, as added by the local law. I move as follows. 1. I move that the Code Council determine pursuant to Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 1, that the standards imposed by Sections 210-52.2A, 210-52.2B1, and 210-52.2B2 of the Town Code, as added by the local law, are more stringent and more restrictive than the standards imposed by the Uniform Code. 2. I move that the Code Council find, pursuant to Executive Law Section 379, Subdivision 2, that there are no special conditions prevailing within the town that make the standards imposed by Sections 210-52.2A, 210-52.2B1, and 210-52.2B2 of the Town Code, as added by the local law, reasonably necessary. And 3, based on the foregoing finding, I move that the Code Council deny the town's request that the Code Council adopt or approve the standards imposed by Sections 210-52.2A, 210-52.2B1, and 210-52.2B2 of the Town Code, as added by the local law. I offer that to anyone who would like to make such motion.
So Sean and Bill, that sounds like the motion you want to make, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that motion is now before the board. Is there any discussion on that motion? Paul?
Building upon what I said on, regarding the town of Huron and the very high bar, I'm bumping up on almost 40 years in the fire service. And while you would think that, my heart would be that I just want to wrap everybody up in a bubble and protect them from fire, and I certainly do, there is one thing that I've really kind of learned over that 4 decades. That is, certainly in today's day and age, we must be constantly strive to make data-driven decisions rather than follow an I think, I believe, or I feel model, especially when dealing with something as important as code development. And taking a look at the data before us, certainly as it relates to what's being portrayed to be special conditions in the town, I think the data set is way too small, way too focused to really draw any definitive conclusion. The numbers initially would appear to be higher than the state and or national levels, but it's just such a small window. I'm not sure it's an accurate one in that aspect. The other thing that I would share with my colleagues on the council is, when we do things here in New York and we change the model code one way or the other, those of us who participate at the national level go to those hearings with some New York arrogance behind us and say, damn, if this was good enough for New York, this is what should happen at the national level. And I'll be very candid, if I were to take a more restrictive proposal to the national level and try to portray this across the board and convince all of my colleagues and everybody at the IPC hearings that, hey, you should do this in your state, I'd be crucified, run right out of the room, laughed out of the room because numbers just don't support it. So again, you know, you would think I would be in favor of making modifications to the code, more fire protection, more fire protection, more fire protection. In this case, I can't get there. I'm a real strong advocate that we take these model codes and we tinker with them as absolutely minimal as possible here in New York. I think because they've been verified and validated at national level. And that means whether we're going to add things or, more importantly, remove things. I think we are doing a grave disservice when we tinker with it too much.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on the motion? Okay. Hearing none, we'll have Gerard call the roll.
Matt Tebow.
I vote yes to deny.
Paul Martin.
Okay?
Michael Weber.
Yes.
Vincent Repertulo.
Yes.
Keith Wen.
Yes.
Michael Sabatino.
Yes.
Sean Hamlin.
Yes.
Tim DeRuscher.
Yes.
William Tang.
Yes.
Dominic Marinelli.
Yes.
That's 10. Unanimous.
Motion carries unanimously and the petition is denied. Gerard, if you'll let the town know, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, Nick has stayed up there dutifully waiting. 2018 I-Code Summary of Assessment. Nick's going to go through some of the highlights, some of the changes that we're seeing as they work through the process. We are on the schedule, so we are working our way through what will likely be a fall of 2018 notice to propose and working our way through adoption sometime in the middle of 2019, probably the second year. Nick?
So you should have received a rather beefy spreadsheet for this agenda item. It was a continuation of the spreadsheet you received at the last agenda meeting. As Matt pointed out, these are changes to the I-codes, not necessarily changes to the supplement. Because there have been so many changes, we pulled out some of the more notable changes and grouped them by category as presented in the May 11th memo that you received. These categories included building construction, life safety, resilience, and energy efficiency. So I won't take a whole lot of time on this agenda item, but I will quickly burn through a few of these more notable changes. Under building construction, the 2015 plumbing codes had previously specified the minimum number of plumbing fixtures for commercial occupancies as a function of both occupancy and use. The new 2018 plumbing code has been updated to remove the occupancy classification and now relies solely on the description of the use to specify the number of plumbing fixtures. This will ensure that the appropriate number of plumbing fixtures provided are based on the actual use of the space. So, for example, a Group A occupancy, having an occupant load of less than 50 occupants can be classified as a B. So what this does, this removes that code criteria, and you would actually look at it as an A occupancy, what it actually is, what it actually does, what it actually means. The updated IRC now allows the use of alternating tread devices and ship ladders to serve as an element of the means of egress for lofts, mezzanines, and similar areas of not more than 400 square feet. This modification allows greater design flexibility and provides more efficient use of space. These options will provide a significant benefit to owners advancing the trend towards smaller houses, including tiny homes. Which is a nice segue into the next item, IRC Appendix Q.
Just a quick clarification. I think you might have misspoke and said more than
Not more than-
400 square feet.
Not more than 200 square feet in area for ship.
All right. I thought I heard 4.
That's
My
the next
mistake.
one. Appendix Q, tiny homes. That's the 400 square feet. The IRC now contains an appendix that is intended to address the growing tiny home industry. This appendix provides relief to homes that are less than or equal to 400 square feet in area, excluding loft space. The new appendix reduces the requirements for ceiling height, loft dimensions, and loft access to better accommodate smaller homes. ASCE 716 has been updated to address rooftop mounted solar panels. The revised standard specifically addresses roof loads associated with current solar panel installation practices. This updated standard will help ensure that roof loads are accurately accounted for and will result in safer buildings. Under life safety, again, solar panel topic, roof-mounted PV panels installed directly beneath an emergency escape and rescue opening present a hazard to occupants and to firefighters during emergencies. The 2018 IRC requires that a pathway not less than 36 inches wide be provided to the rescue opening and prohibits panels and modules from being installed directly beneath openings. This new code provision will ensure that emergency escape and rescue openings, which are essential for life safety, can be used as intended during an emergency. The Uniform Code currently contains access and pathway requirements for solar PV systems. However, it does not specifically address this topic covered by the IRC. Under the resiliency category, the IRC now contains new requirements for design and construction of slabs, stairs, ramps, and decks located in coastal high hazard zones and coastal high hazard V zones and A zones. The new requirements are intended to minimize the damage to structures by allowing them to break away from the dwelling during a flood event without causing significant damage to the remainder of the building. This code change will ensure resiliency during flood events. Back on ASC 716, the updated ASCE 7 includes a basic wind map specific to this Category 4 buildings. Category 4 buildings are structures that are necessary to respond to emergencies and situations during natural disasters. Examples of these buildings include hospitals, police stations, and fire stations. In addition to this new map, all basic wind speed maps have been updated to correct inaccuracies in the special wind region of New York State. Special wind regions are areas that exhibit unusual wind conditions, such as mountainous terrain and gorges. The updated wind maps will add additional degrees of resiliency in the Uniform Code and help New York recover faster after extreme wind events. I'm going to touch base on a FEMA policy. This is not in the code, but it affects the code. There's a FEMA policy floating around that we're still looking into. According to the FEMA recovery policy, as a condition of assistance, buildings eligible for repair, replacement, or construction that are located in hazard-prone areas must be required to use, at a minimum, the hazard resistance standards referenced in the most recent edition of the Model Building Codes. That is the IBC, IEBC, and IRC. The purpose of the policy is to establish minimum standards for public assistance projects to promote resiliency and achieve risk reduction under the authority of the Stafford Act. Now, FEMA does not specifically require jurisdictions to adopt the most recent editions of the code. Instead, it requires compliance with the most recent I-codes as a condition of receiving the public assistance. So according to the policy, if a building were to suffer damage from a natural disaster, such as a wind event, the building would need to be repaired in accordance with the newest model codes. New Yorkers seeking federal assistance may therefore need to comply with the more stringent of the 2018 codes in addition to the Uniform Code. By adopting the most recent ICC model codes, you could possibly reduce compliance burdens which would otherwise be imposed upon owners who are seeking federal recovery relief following a natural disaster. Under the energy efficiency category, the IRC has been updated to require not less than 90% of the permanently installed lighting fixtures to contain only high efficacy lamps, whereas the 2015 IRC requires 75%. This will obviously result in greater energy savings. The IECC and IRC have been revised to have a new prescriptive U-factor requirement. U-factors have been reduced by 0.02. It probably sounds insignificant, however, windows represent a significantly greater capacity for heat loss than walls. For this reason, windows with lower than code U-factors are becoming increasingly more popular by consumers. The IRC code change was intended to match industry trends while requiring more efficiency windows. The IECC requires Group R1 buildings, hotels and motels that contain over 50 guest rooms to provide controls that are capable of automatically modifying the cooling and heating set points within 30 minutes after the occupants have left the guest room, and when the guest room is unrented or has not been continuously occupied for more than 16 hours. The code change is intended to reduce energy in unused or unrented R1 guest rooms. IECC Chapter 6. On February 27, 2018, the Department of Energy published a determination that the 2016 edition of ASHRAE 90.1 improves energy efficiency in buildings as compared to the 2013 edition. The 2018 IECC incorporates by reference this new edition of ASHRAE. According to the feds, the Secretary determines that a revised edition of ASHRAE 90.1 improves the overall energy efficiency in commercial buildings. Each state shall, within 2 years after the determination, certify that it reviewed and updated its commercial energy requirements to meet or exceed those established by the new ASHRAE 90.1. The certification shall provide evidence that the updated code meets or exceeds the updated ASHRAE. New York State has until February 2020 to certify that it reviewed and updated the commercial provisions of the State Energy Conservation Code to meet or exceed the 2016 edition of ASHRAE 90.1. The division recommends that the Code Council update the Energy Code and adopt the 2018 IECC and this new reference standard so as to ensure compliance with federal requirements. Any questions?
So I want to encourage the council to ask questions as we move through this process so that everyone's comfortable with what we're sort of moving forward with here. To light that off, I mean, I will certainly ask Nick, with regard to the wind maps, have they changed the maps, the speeds, or both?
Well, there's a special wind region of New York State. It follows the Hudson Valley more or less. In the previous editions, which I had in front of me, imagine it came down the Hudson Valley and had a little kink in it. They took the kink out of it and they shifted it northward towards Albany. It said, as far as I remember in the commentary, it was a graphical error in the previous editions of ASCP. So,
wind speeds on Long Island not changing?
That changed. They did update the wind speed maps. They added a few contours in the upper part of New York State, which actually reduced the wind speeds in certain areas. So some areas have more wind, some areas have less wind. It's just it's different, it's more accurate. It's a better way to put it.
Okay. I think I'm probably echoing something Nick said, but I think I want to bring this out just so that we're all on the same page. The FEMA policy does sort of put us in a pickle, right? Because the current version of the code is the 2018 version, right?
Yes, well, again, it does not require adoption of the 18 codes. It just requires compliance if you want the money.
Right.
So if I were, if my house were flooded out, I'd have to build back in accordance with a higher standard. So I would have to hire a design professional, design a house in accordance with Uniform Code and the 2018s. And he would have, or she would have to provide enough detailed information on the plan to provide that to the code official who doesn't have the 18 codes.
Right.
Because they have to certify that it complies with at least the Uniform Code and whatever coordination. And then during the inspection, after the permit's been issued, it's being constructed, making sure that it's being constructed in accordance with both Uniform Code and whatever higher standard that might be in place.
Right.
So it seems at face value to be a bit of a compliance burden, and it would seem to induce a little bit of extra cost up front to require a designer who doesn't have the 18 codes, might not have training the 18 codes to buy them and review and coordinate. Yeah. So it seems to be in that respect an incentive to go towards the 18 codes.
Yes, right, because at current, the code enforcement officer can't require them to put it back to that level, so without us saying yes. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, et cetera, with regard to Nick's presentation, these points that he brought forward, or this ever-growing spreadsheet that we have that notes the differences between the 15 and the 18?
Not so much bigger.
That's good to know. Anyway. Okay. Oh. Yep.
Do have a question, it's going to be a habit here. Relative to the 2017 supplement that we currently have, is that intended to be added on to this?
Yes, this
As
initial
another
stage.
chart form kind of thing, and the same thing?
Yeah, well, this initial stage was to show you what has changed in the world of the iCodes, and after everyone has kind of gotten comfortable with it and decided what they like and what they don't like, and deciding, I guess, how to move forward, we would take those changes and dump them into the supplement. So hopefully at the next meeting, you'll see a draft version of the supplement, and then the following meeting, a better version of the supplement. So we'll continue to progress it. And we would like input on the whole stage of the game. Again, the 18 codes are available online. If you go to the ICC, you can find the 2018 codes and look at them at any point in time. And if you ever have any questions about anything in the spreadsheet or anything you'd like to see going forward, just give us a call, shoot Gerard an email, and we can try to take it up on the phone and definitely in future agenda meetings. But again, the next meeting, hopefully you'll get a supplement, a red line supplement, showing how things have changed with respect to the 18 codes.
Okay, so asked in another way, following up on Mr. Martin's discussion on lesser changes seems to be a lot easier for everybody to follow and understand. Are we going to review those changes that we currently have and get rid of them and start the 2018 as the basis and then make it, or are we adding the 2017?
Well, what happens is the 2017 supplement includes the requirements of Executive Law 378. So they've all...
Notwithstanding those, I'm talking more of the technical items?
Yeah, the technical changes that you would like to see incorporated, or anything, I guess, deleted. I guess what happens is the supplement modifies the code. So we would have to modify the supplement to reflect the I-codes, section numbers and whatnot. If you were in favor, like for instance, if you're in favor of the not having solar panels beneath the emergency escape and rescue opening, that provision would be filtered into the new supplement. So you'd have a new line item in the supplement. If you're in favor of the Appendix Q, that would be filtered into Chapter 1 of the supplement that states Appendix Q of the IRC is adopted.
I believe you're looking at the other end of it. You're looking at the 2017 supplement provisions we have in there that aren't new, that we might want to take out to try to get closer to
Take out or
the
keep,
I-codes.
whichever. I mean, in following along that same factor of taking out changes so there aren't changes is the point.
Yeah, I guess that would be the next step, is to look at the supplement
Okay, so
changes
that's-
and actually evaluate those if we want to remove her.
So,
Yeah, my apologies.
so once, I mean, just trying to visualize this in my head. So once we get to the point where we have this done with regard to the I-code changes, we can then figure out what in the current supplement has been updated.
Right.
And is now
That could
dropped
be
into
eliminated,
that.
right.
Then we have a supplement left over, and we have to decide what to do
Right,
with that.
right,
Right?
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had to visualize it. I got it. Okay. Is there anything else for Nick? All right, stay tuned. I have a feeling that the next meeting may be a bit longer as we move towards notice of proposed. Okay, moving to agenda item 6, briefings. I'm going to have council run through brief briefings, just so that the code council is aware of things that are happening in the code world or that are coming our way. Fiona?
All right, so the first two items that I'm going to discuss are just in the code world, as Matt explained, and the third one is going to be something that's going to be more relevant to our work here at the council. So the first item is the amendment to section 376-A of the executive law, and this became effective on March 18th. This provision of the executive law is where it provides for the rules and regulations relating to the training of code enforcement personnel. It already has requirements for the establishing of the minimum training and examination requirements to qualify as a code enforcement official. and to provide for the issuance of a certification when you satisfy those requirements. But now, the added component is that it provides for the revocation or suspension of the certification of any code enforcement personnel found after a hearing to have materially failed to uphold duties of a code enforcement officer, including but not limited to making material errors or omissions on an inspection report. Based on this change to the law on April 25th, DOS adopted a rule as an emergency rule and also at the same time proposed the rule for adoption permanently, which is the new subpart 1208-6 in Title 19 of the NYCRR. And it pretty much just puts into the regulations the details for how this revocation or suspension of the certification process is going to go into place, and provides that an administrative law judge will have to determine after a hearing that the either certified code enforcement official or CEO or the building safety inspector, the BSI, materially failed to uphold his or her code enforcement duties. And to just go into the details, if you're interested, the material failure that is identified in the regulation is a failure to note one or more serious code violations on an inspection report, making any other material error or omission on an inspection report, demonstrating by act or omission willful misconduct, gross negligence, or gross incompetence in the performance of code enforcement activities, performing any code enforcement activity at a time when the CEO or BSI certification is inactive or suspended, and in the case of the BSI, performing any code enforcement activity other than the fire safety and or property maintenance inspections on existing buildings. So that's just a brief summary of that rule. If you'd like to see the full rule, you could go on the Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes website, and it is posted there in full. It will actually be, text will also appear in the State Register tomorrow on May 16th. We're going to have a public hearing in this room on July 24th, and the public comment period will end July 30th. The next item is the condition assessments for parking garages. We had spoken about this a couple meetings ago, at the end of last year, I want to say, which is when the legislation the year before was vetoed, and the governor's veto message directed the Department of State to come up with a rule regarding the parking garage condition assessments that would be necessary to ensure the safety of these structures in the state. And we did have the Assembly, both sponsors of the bill from the Assembly and the Senate that came and presented, and I believe the Code Council was in support at the time, moving forward in that direction. And we have, the Department of State has proposed a rule that would amend parts 1202, 1203, and 1204 of Title 19 of the NYCRR that would require cities, towns, villages, counties, and state agencies that are responsible for administering and enforcing the Uniform Code to require owners of parking garages to have periodic condition assessments of those parking garages performed by qualified professional engineers. And that would be a licensed professional engineer who has at least 3 years of experience performing structural evaluations. So the rule would provide that the local government's code enforcement program must include provisions that require these condition assessments of parking garages. And again, I could go into the nitty-gritty of it all, but if you want to read the full text, that is also available on the Department of State Division of Building Standards and Codes website. It will also appear in the State Register tomorrow, May 16th, and the public hearing for that will be in this room on July 17th, and the public comment period will end July 23rd. And the third item, which is the one that is probably going to be of interest to everyone here, is Chapter 58 of the Laws of 2018, amended Executive Law Section 378, Subdivision 16 and 17, which provide that at least one safe, sanitary, and convenient diaper changing station, deck, table, or similar amenity, which shall be available for use by both male and female occupants, and which must comply with Section 603.5 diaper changing tables of the 2009 edition of the ICC 8117.1, accessible and usable buildings and facilities, on each floor level containing a public toilet room in all newly constructed buildings that have one or more areas classified as Assembly Group A or Mercantile Group M occupancies, and in all existing buildings that have one or more areas classified as Assembly Group A occupancies or Mercantile Group M occupancies that undergo a substantial renovation. And the Code Council is going to be tasked with prescribing the type of renovation to be deemed a substantial renovation. And the Code Council may also exempt historic buildings from these requirements. The other item that is going to be required is signage. So in each building that has one or more areas classified as the Assembly Group A or Mercantile Group M occupancy, and in which at least one diaper changing station is installed, a sign must be posted in a conspicuous place in each public toilet room indicating the location of the nearest diaper changing station available for the gender using that public toilet room. And that sign requirement is required regardless of whether it's voluntarily installed or whether it's required to be installed based on this law. And this law will become effective January 1st of 2019, and provided effective immediately, any addition, amendment, or repeal of any rules or regulations by the Secretary of State or the Code Council is necessary for the implementation of the law on the effective date, or authorized and directed to be made and completed on or before the effective date. So we are tasked with trying to complete this prior to January 1st of 2019. And we're hoping that the Code Development Unit is in the process of developing this rule, and we will hopefully be providing something in a draft form at the next meeting on July 19th for the Code Council's review and consideration.
Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding those briefings? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Gerard, do we have anyone for public comment today?
No, we do not.
Does anyone in the audience wish to give public comment to the Code Council today? Come forward, please state your name.
Morning, my name is Tom Parsons. I'm the fire chief of the city of Bethlehem. Actually, I just came to sit in on a meeting and you were talking about 2018 codes, so I thought it was an opportunity to bring your attention to one area of concern or interest I have, is that, as many of you know, the 2021 codes are in the process of going through adoption period, and specifically there are some code changes that were put forth by constituents in New York State, myself included. On behalf of myself and the city of Ithaca, we put in for a code change in Appendix D, which has been adopted by committee, but it's going to final vote in October. My hope is that that you, at some point, will reconsider, as an addition to the supplement, those changes that are adopted for the 2021 code that were put forth by New York State constituencies to be added to the 2018-2019 supplement. I'm pretty sure 18 code. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak before the council today? Okay, hearing none. Moving to Agenda 8, future meetings. So the next meeting, as we've heard a number of times today, is scheduled for July 19th, 2018. We also have a meeting in the end of September, and a meeting tentatively scheduled for the beginning of December. Is there any other business? Gerard, is there any other business before the council today?
I have no other business except for to remind people that the sign-up sheet for credit is up here if you need credits for attending.
John or Peniota, any other business before the council today? No? Okay, I will express my thanks to the members who are here today. I know that we're short, and so I'm very happy that all of you could make it today so that we could conduct our business. I appreciate it. I also want to thank the staff. They have had they're having a run through this new code, and it's very time intensive and requiring very long hours process. So I appreciate it, and I look forward to what they're bringing at the next couple of meetings. I'd like to thank my new counsel sitting next to me. She did an excellent job today. I think everybody would agree. Certainly a lot better than I did today, so well done. Thank you. And at this point, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Would somebody like to second that? Come on, guys. Somebody say second so we can go home. Second. I heard it plenty of times. All in favor, signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yes.